Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. We are back in conversation with Steve Durbin, Managing Director, this afternoon to discuss the CISO Reset, redefining your value to the business. The role of a CISO has evolved over the years, and now it's someone who combines InfoSec capabilities with business requirements. They must be able to align cyber to business strategy, speaking both languages, while developing reporting metrics that satisfy the board and promote good cyber resilience across the business. All these attributes support the belief that the CISO of the future doesn't have to come from an IT background. Steve, given everything you know about the evolving threat landscape and the need to marry business with technology and people, if you were in the position of a CISO and had the time to step back and reset, what are some objectives you would set out to achieve in your first 100 days in that role?
I think it's a very difficult question for many CISOs to answer. I think that you touched on some of the key elements in there that are really, I think, occupying the minds of CISOs today, which is, how do you get much closer to the business? The days really of security being all about the firewall are very long gone. If we look at the role of the CISO today, it's about really trying to anticipate the way in which threats might impact an organization. It's about trying to anticipate the way in which an organization might respond. It's about anticipating the way an organization is going to direct itself from a strategic standpoint and what the implications of that might be from a security perspective. And then it's about how you pull all of those things together and articulate them, not just to the board of directors, but also across the enterprise. And those, I think, are highly complex issues that are probably outside the comfort zone of a lot of CISOs today. So if you've got the luxury of either going into a new role or doing a reset, I think the first thing to do is to just step back and say, hang on a minute, what is the role that I can best play within this organization to support the strategic objectives? So what are we trying to do as a business? And I think if you can get clarity on that, what you're then able to do is to align security with the business. And for me anyway, that really is the goal, because that enables you to position security as a business enabler. It enables you to really talk about security in terms that business leaders will understand. So when we talk about, for instance, having a board dashboard, how does the board understand how we're doing? If we start talking about security-based issues, in the majority of cases, the board simply won't understand it. It'll switch off. A lot of business leaders as well, outside of the boardroom, will do exactly the same. If, however, we talk about how security can help deliver business benefit, perhaps by supporting expansion across different jurisdictions, perhaps by supporting the rollout of a new product or business line, then we're engaging far, far better. So the first thing, the key thing for any new CISO, I think, is to understand those strategic objectives, is to map that back to what it is that you're trying to do from a security standpoint. I think the second thing is really to just review the basics. So many breaches, losses of information are dependent or brought about today because some of the basics haven't been put in place. We haven't patched. We haven't updated the software. For good reason in a lot of instances, because resources weren't available, we didn't consider it to be important. But it's about focusing on the basics. And to do that, you have to have a risk-based mentality. It's all about balancing risk and reward. You can't possibly hope to cover off everything. So understand the strategy, really focus on the basics, and then you can get into some of the more complicated elements of security in terms of perhaps how you might use some of the more advanced techniques that are out there around perhaps AI, if you're into that from an organizational standpoint, or indeed how it is that you can add value through a research and development process, or the way in which an organization is pursuing an acquisition strategy. For me, the role of the CISO going forward is really all about alignment with the business.
So, Steve, what are some of the challenges businesses are facing when sourcing a CISO?
We talk about skill shortages. When we talk about them within the security environment, I think we always have to be very careful to think about exactly what we mean. Very many large bull CISOs, if you like, are reaching retirement age. So they're moving on. We're looking for a new generation of CISOs to replace them. They will have very different skill sets. They will have a very different approach to the management of security. So how do we as organizations enable that? How can we really help our HR departments to source the right individuals. Where should they come from? Should they come from a technical background? I would challenge that. I think that bringing people in who have a much broader perspective is probably the way to go in that particular area. Because we can either outsource some of the more technical-based skills to managed service providers or third parties who have those skill sets. What we can't do is we can't outsource how an organization actually fundamentally operates. We can't outsource how we work better together. You have to have a change agent within the enterprise that's able to do that. And I think cyber presents the opportunity for that. It's a tremendously dynamic and interesting environment. We don't often sell it that way, but it is. And for most organizations, they are heavily dependent upon operating effectively in cyberspace. Yes, we're struggling in terms of, does the board really understand what it is that security is up to? Can security communicate effectively with the board? Put all those issues aside, I think we have to take a very much more holistic perspective in terms of what the requirements are for people to operate in cyberspace. We have to take a much more realistic standpoint in terms of what we're able to do in terms of throwing a security blanket out over an enterprise and third parties. And we have to realize, certainly from a technology standpoint, that the days of the organization stipulating how technology is used are pretty much long gone. The user is king. And if we think about all of those different components within the security environment and the way in which a CISO has to pull those different things together, then the job is very, very much bigger than it was just a short number of years ago. And so we are starting, I think, to have to adapt the way in which we come to the role. And that means that we're going to have to start looking for different approaches and indeed perhaps different skill sets, which in a lot of instances are not in place today.
Who do you think the CISO should report to in the organization and why?
I think that the CISO has to report to somebody that understands the overall scope of the challenge. And I'm being a little bit careful with the way in which I'm positioning that, because I don't think there's a right answer. I think that every organization needs to make its own decision as to the importance of a CISO to the business. So, for instance, I've seen CISOs reporting through to chief risk officers. I can make a strong argument that that is the right place to be. I've seen some reporting to a chief financial officer. Again, I can make strong arguments for that taking place. The chief privacy officer, for instance, is another route that I've seen some CISOs go down. And if we look at all of those different structures, the conclusion that I've come to is that it's the organization that has determined the best place for that CISO to report based on what it is that they're trying to do and how they view security within their enterprise and within the overall strategic objectives that they have as a business. And an organization that has a CISO reporting through to a risk officer clearly has a different perspective than one that is happy to have it go through to a CFO. My own view is that CISOs that are reporting through to CIOs, the IT area, are probably struggling the most because the organization is taking a very technology-focused view on security. My own view is that technology is just one piece of cybersecurity. There are so many other different components that we need to be considering today that actually if you are restricting a CISO to only working through technology, you're always going to be struggling. So for me, that's probably not the best place to have them. But organizations would disagree with me, and I'm sure that, in certain instances, having a CISO report through to a CIO is exactly the right place for them.
That's really interesting. How as a CISO would you work with the security teams and the board and the legal department to confront the reality of a breach?
I think that before we get to that, we have to consider how information is used across the enterprise. I'm not really sort of fudging the question here. If you look at information risk, information security, it bleeds today into so many different areas of the organization. It bleeds into legal risk, it bleeds into technology risk, it bleeds into organizational risk, into compliance risk. So I think the CISO is having to reach out to all of these different areas and departments today anyway. And so how do you go about working with those organizations, either to avoid a breach or in the lead up to discovering a breach? For me, it's about business as usual. It's back to your first question, the 100 days. How do you establish that rapport? How do you work collaboratively with colleagues across some of these different areas so that come the day when things go wrong, you aren't just starting for the first time. You have actually got your playbook. You do know what it is that you're going to be doing. You've understood who you need to call and who's up first, and all of these good things. But that requires you to have reached out across the enterprise and to have established that overall perspective right from the beginning. And as I say, and I keep banging on about this, it has to be in line with the strategic business direction that the organization is taking. Because if you're out of line with that, you're going to find it very difficult.
How would you ensure that you're up to date with industry knowledge and self-development?
Again, I think it's about collaboration. I think it's about learning from colleagues. I think that it is about attending conferences. It is about participation in industry bodies, the ISF being one, but it's not the only one that's out there. It's ISACA, for instance, if you're interested in your own personal development at the sort of more technical level. But I would also encourage CISOs to branch out more into some of the business areas. Some of the most effective CISOs that I've come across are really able to articulate some of the things that happen at business conferences, at Davos, for instance, at the way in which organizations need to adapt to the way that the business environment is changing. So I think that the CISO role is becoming very much more multidisciplinary. It's requiring you to have a broader understanding, not just of your own area, but also outside of that. And I think that probably the key thing for most new CISOs is to really try to find yourself a mentor, somebody that you can work with, somebody who is probably not even in the same sector as you, that you can go to really learn from. It's that sort of almost like going back to being an apprentice, if you like, but it's a coach, it's a mentor, it's somebody who can help you to position things, because the CISO role is demanding. It's a tough job. And I think that more and more we're going to require some of that support infrastructure that, again, perhaps is somewhat alien to some CISOs today.
Always interesting to hear your insights. Thank you so much for returning for this conversation. I really like that concept of the CISO reset. And I think it's timely as we all tend to reevaluate our goals and our objectives when we get to this time of the year. And we know for sure that every CISO will have a lot on his or her plate in 2018 with mandatory legislation to address in the form of the EU GDPR, that breaches will continue to happen and that the security workforce is changing. For more information on building a strong cyber resilience, engaging with the board, promoting awareness in the business, addressing emerging threats and legislative requirements, please visit securityforum.org.